Will the senator yield for a question?
I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
First, I'd like to commend my colleague. I want to thank you, first of all, for your spiritual obedience. I want to thank you so much as well for your commitment and your dedication, and want to thank you as well for your courageous leadership. I want to thank you also, Senator Booker, for your recognition of the times that we are living in. These are times that we will recount, our children will recount, and I think all of those of good conscience who watch during this time and say nothing will also be held to account. As the senator has eloquently remarked, these are not normal times. We're watching an administration that is drunk with vengeance, hatred, and surrounded by incompetent people who are taking callous actions, who are inhumane, and because of their incompetence are making costly mistakes that will harm the American people and denigrate the hardworking people of this country by proposing tax cuts. And these tax cuts are not designed to help the average American person. They are designed to help billionaires. And they're doing so by firing thousands of middle-class workers and more. What we are seeing before our eyes is not only unconscionable, we know as well that it is deeply immoral, that it is inhumane, it is wicked. We are seeing with glee the actions of people who are so happy to tear down, but I am watching and waiting to see what it is they intend to build in this country. And in your remarks over these hours, you have made that plain for the American people to see. You've uplifted the stories of everyday people, and what we recognize as we hear about the firings and we hear about the devastation and chaos is we're not talking about numbers, we're talking about humans, about people. These are our friends, these are our family members, these are our neighbors, these are our church friends, these are our colleagues who this administration has harmed. And so my question today centers around the topic of housing. We have a housing crisis in this country, that's no secret. And in fact, we recognize that through the actions of this administration, what is harmful will be exacerbated. Maryland is nearly 100,000 housing units short, and as you know, it is both about an affordability and a supply problem. We need to make home ownership, which is part of the American dream, and how the average American builds wealth in this country accessible to more Americans. I think about my parents, Mr. Senator, who married at 21 and 22 years old. And at the time that they married, although my father was a car salesman and selling newspapers and my mother was a receptionist, 5 years into their marriage, they could afford to buy a home. This is no longer the expectation of the average American family. My own 19-year-old daughter doesn't have the realistic hope that she can follow even her grandparents. This problem affects red states and it affects blue states, which is the theme that you have hit on in all of these hours of speaking. When this president acts against the interest of the middle class, we recognize that he is not just harming Democrats as he intends, but unfortunately his actions harm everyday Americans. It affects those who voted for him, it affects those who didn't vote for him, and it affects those who did not vote at all. He's harming Republicans too. He's harming Americans. And so this administration is slashing funding and personnel at the very agencies that are tasked with addressing this crisis. He is illegally firing HUD employees. And this administration has stalled millions of dollars in previously allocated funding intended to help those who need affordable housing. And again, his actions are so indiscriminate, so immoral, so callous, so heartless, that he is impacting the very people who supported him, as well as those who didn't. This administration has effectively ended enforcement of the Fair Housing Act, one of the most important American civil rights laws. This administration is considering privatizing the Federal Housing Finance Agency, which guarantees over half of the U.S. mortgage market. And to make matters worse, this administration is proposing sweeping tariffs on our allies, driving up the cost of home construction. And let's be clear, absolutely none of this will help to build homes. None of this will make home ownership more accessible to Marylanders or Americans. And in fact, we understand that it is not the intention of this administration to do so. It's for the billionaires to be able to afford their tax cuts. And so I've heard from people all across my state, blue areas, red areas, purple areas, every area, who are concerned about this. And so I have a question for you, and I want to thank you as I ask the question for sacrificing your own body today to bring attention to this. What are you seeing in the state of New Jersey about how this administration's unconscionable actions are making housing less affordable and home ownership less accessible?
The Senator, I want to thank her for the question. I want to thank her for being my colleague, but more important than even being my friend, she is a spiritual sister of mine and was very kind to me when I was telling her that I was going to do this, and gave me so much encouragement and prayer, and I just love you and I'm grateful. And you read the litany of things. I had a whole section, a whole binder that my staff told me to skip and go to this one, about all the things, going in deep and depth to all the things the Trump administration is doing to make housing more unaffordable, more inaccessible, more expensive, more discrimination in housing, which we know is still a problem, more challenges, more pain heaped upon rural areas, and more complications and problems for building affordable housing in all areas. It is